Whitney Langston had barely stepped onto the cruise ship when she realized she might have made a mistake. The sheer size of the luxury liner made her feel like an ant lost in a diamond showroom. She tightened her grip on the strap of her worn leather bag and tried not to stare too long at the couples laughing over champagne flutes or the groups of friends snapping selfies against the glittering sea. Alone. She was alone. And that fact became even clearer when the hostess at the welcome dinner gave her a polite, almost pitying smile before leading her toward a table where a single seat remained across from a man so unfairly good-looking it made her stomach flip. "Mr. Everett, this is Miss Langston. She'll be joining you this evening," the hostess said with a bright smile. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped dark hair and a sharp jaw, looked up from his whiskey glass. His eyes, icy blue and piercing, locked onto hers with quiet interest. "Please," he said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. "I was starting to think I'd be eating alone." Whitney gave a nervous smile and sank into her chair. "Thanks. I really didn't think through the whole solo cruise thing." He gave a low chuckle, warm and unexpected. "I get it. Sometimes you need to get away. I'm Trent Everett, by the way." "Whitney Langston," she replied, reaching to shake his hand. His grip was firm, warm. The waiter appeared, placing down a menu Whitney couldn't have afforded even if she hadn't drained her savings just to book the cruise in the first place. She scanned the dishes, eyes widening. "Wow. Is this included?" Trent's lips curved into a smile. "It is if you're in the upper decks." She blinked. "Oh, I'm not. I'm in one of the tiny cabins that probably used to be a broom closet." He laughed again, and this time it was easier. "Then consider this your upgrade for the night." Dinner was unexpectedly easy. Trent wasn't arrogant or pushy. He asked about her job, elementary school art teacher in South Dakota, and actually seemed interested when she said she loved working with kids. "So what do you do?" she asked as she sipped her wine, already feeling warmer from the alcohol and his attention. He paused. "I invest in companies. Mostly tech. Real estate. Boring stuff." She raised a brow. "Boring doesn't usually come with a tailored jacket like that." He gave a small, amused nod. "Fair enough." The next morning, Whitney didn't expect to see him again. A single dinner didn't mean anything, especially not with a man like that. But when she stepped out onto the deck with her coffee, he was already there, leaning on the railing in a crisp linen shirt, gazing out at the sea. "Morning," he said, turning slightly. She was surprised. "You're up early. I don't really sleep in. Want to join me?" Whitney hesitated, then walked over. They stood in silence for a few moments, the wind teasing her hair, the sun rising on the horizon. "Why'd you come on this cruise?" he asked softly. She shrugged. "I needed a reset. My mom passed away a few months ago. We always talked about taking a cruise together. So, I figured I'd go. For both of us." Trent's gaze softened. "I'm sorry." She gave a small smile. "Thanks. What about you? What made you decide to sail into the middle of the ocean?" He looked out toward the waves. "I needed to disappear for a while." She glanced at him, curiosity sparked. "From what?" He turned toward her, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Loneliness, maybe. Regret. Too much noise. They ended up spending most of the day together, lounging near the pool, walking through the art gallery on board, grabbing lunch from the buffet. Whitney hadn't laughed this much in months. Later, back in her cabin, she stared at the ceiling, heart racing. She barely knew him, but it felt like she had known him longer than a day. On the third day of the cruise, they were seated together again at dinner. But this time, Trent didn't wait for the hostess to place her. He was already at the table, waving her over with a grin. "Didn't want to risk them putting someone else across from me," he said, standing to pull out her chair. "You're ridiculous," she laughed. "I'm serious. You're the only person on this boat who doesn't pretend to know who I am." She paused. "Should I?" Trent tilted his head. "I guess not." But the mystery gnawed at her. That night, she wandered into the ship's boutique and saw something that made her breath catch. There, in a glass case near the watches, was a magazine, Forbes. On the cover was Trent Everett, his icy eyes unmistakable even in print. Tech billionaire behind Everett Industries breaks into private aviation. Net worth, 11 billion. She stared at the cover, stunned. Of course. The expensive suits. The private deck access. The fact that he never mentioned needing to check his balance before ordering caviar. The next day when they met for breakfast, she couldn't unsee it. Couldn't unknow it. You're quiet, he said, handing her a plate of fresh pastries. I saw a magazine, she said, meeting his eyes. With your face on it. He didn't flinch. Figured you would eventually. Why didn't you tell me? Because I liked the way you looked at me. Her heart thudded. What does that mean? Like I was just a guy. Not a bank account. She swallowed hard. You were just a guy. It's just a lot. I get it, he said, voice low. But I want to keep spending time with you. If that's okay. She looked at him, this man who was supposed to be out of reach, untouchable. But the way he watched her? The way he listened, really listened? It wasn't fake. Yeah, she said finally, voice soft. It's okay. He smiled then, and it wasn't the guarded, practiced grin of a billionaire used to cameras. It was real. And Whitney realized something that scared her more than anything. She was already falling for him. I've never been in a helicopter before, Whitney said as the ocean wind tugged at her ponytail. Trent's eyes flickered sideways as he handed her a headset. You said you wanted to see the islands from above. I figured we'd do it properly. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. You okay with flying? It's not that, she said, adjusting the headset clumsily. It's more like, no one's ever just done something like this for me before. Trent didn't respond right away. Instead, he waited for the pilot's signal, then helped secure her belt. The cabin was sleek, cream leather with brushed steel accents, and the moment the rotors started spinning, Whitney felt the vibration in her chest. As the helicopter lifted off from the ship's helipad, she gripped the armrest tightly. Below, the cruise liner shrank, its decks and pools looking like pieces of a model set. The islands ahead looked like emeralds scattered across a turquoise canvas. Trent leaned in, his voice calm through the headset. You're allowed to enjoy it, you know? She turned her head, trying not to look as shaken as she felt. I am. It's just surreal. You know what's surreal? His voice carried a different tone, now quieter. Meeting someone who doesn't ask what I own within the first 5 minutes. Whitney blinked. Is that really what happens? He nodded. Pretty often. Or they pretend not to know, but it's there. The calculation. Well, I already saw the magazine, she said, shrugging. So no pretending here. Trent gave a short exhale that might have been a laugh. I still don't know what to do with that. The helicopter swept low over a stretch of white sand. Below, waves lapped lazily at the edge of a private beach, untouched except for a single cabana in the center. Wait, Whitney said, eyes narrowing. Is that where we're going? Trent's grin widened. You said you hadn't gotten any real sun yet. Once they landed, he led her down a narrow path of stepping stones toward a table set beneath a woven canopy. A server in a crisp white shirt greeted them with 2 glasses of something cold and pink. Whitney took hers cautiously. You really know how to make a girl feel underdressed. You're perfect, Trent said simply, and the way he looked at her made her forget she was in a sundress she'd packed without thinking, her sandals already dusty from the walk. As they ate grilled fish and tropical fruit, the conversation turned unexpectedly personal. I used to draw all the time, Trent said, running a hand along the edge of his glass. Before everything got so loud, Whitney tilted her head. You draw. I used to. Mostly street scenes. People. I'd sit on a bench for hours just sketching what moved me. Why'd you stop? He looked out at the water. I guess I told myself I didn't have time anymore. But that wasn't really true. She watched him for a moment, sensing the vulnerability just beneath the polished exterior. You ever think about starting again? I did. Last night. He glanced at her. After I dropped you off. Whitney's chest tightened. That's really unexpected. Meeting you was unexpected, he said, his tone quieter now. I didn't board this cruise thinking I'd meet someone who made me want to be better. Before she could respond, the sky shifted, the clouds thickening as a cool breeze swept through the trees. The server rushed back under the canopy, murmuring about an incoming storm and how the helicopter would need to return before it worsened. Trent stood, already checking his watch. "We've got about 20 minutes. Back in the air, the mood was different. The sky had turned a steel gray, and Whitney's fingers gripped the seat tighter than before. "I'm not afraid of a little turbulence," she said, trying to sound casual. Trent looked over. "You sure? I've done this route enough to know we'll be fine." She gave a tight smile. "It's not the flying. It's the falling." His brow lifted. "Falling." Whitney looked out the window, avoiding his gaze. "Into something I didn't expect. With someone I can't afford to lose." There was a pause. "Then you're not going to lose me." She turned her head slowly. "You don't know that." "I do," he said, voice firm, "because I've never felt this drawn to someone. Not like this." The helicopter touched down just as the first drops of rain began to fall. They ran beneath the canopy toward the glass doors of the upper deck lounge, laughing as the sky opened up behind them. Inside, the room was dimly lit, all dark wood and soft jazz. Trent ordered 2 hot drinks, and they settled into a leather booth near the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. "I don't usually let people in," she said, cradling the mug between her hands. "I've been through too many disappointments to just open up to someone who could disappear the moment the cruise ends." He looked at her then, really looked. "Then I guess I'll have to prove I'm not going anywhere." Whitney tilted her head. "How?" He leaned forward slightly. "By showing up. Every day. No disappearing, no pretending. Just me." She stared at him, heart racing. "And what if I'm scared anyway?" "Then I'll wait. Until you're not." The rain continued, blurring the horizon. But inside the lounge, with the warmth of his presence beside her and the sincerity in his voice still echoing in her chest, something in Whitney began to shift. Not just trust, hope. The day the ship docked in Santorini, Whitney felt her nerves buzzing like static beneath her skin. She hadn't expected Trent to suggest leaving the ship with her for the day, especially not with a personal driver waiting at the marina and a sleek black car that definitely didn't come from the cruise's standard excursion package. But he had, and now they were weaving through winding cliffside roads, sunlight flickering through the windows as whitewashed buildings gave way to endless views of blue. Trent didn't speak much during the drive, and neither did she. There was a charged quiet between them, not uncomfortable but filled with something unsaid. When they finally pulled into a gated villa perched precariously on the edge of the caldera, Whitney turned to him, blinking at the sprawling estate. "You rented this?" "No," he said, opening his door. "I own it." She didn't respond, just followed him through the stone archway. The villa was modern and warm at once, terracotta floors, handmade ceramics, and floor-to-ceiling glass walls that framed the sea like a painting. "I never stay long when I come here," he said as they stepped onto the terrace. "But the view always reminds me why I bought it." Whitney walked to the edge and leaned on the railing. The wind caught strands of her hair, and she pulled them back absently. "It's unbelievable." "You are," he said suddenly. She turned slightly. "What?" "You're unbelievable, Whitney. You're honest in a way I forgot people could be. And I've been trying not to say anything because I didn't want to scare you off, but I don't think I can hold it in anymore." Her heart thudded. "Say what?" He stepped closer, the lines between his brows deeper than usual. "I don't want this to be a vacation romance. I want to see where this goes when the ship docks for good." Whitney looked out over the water. "I didn't bring a suitcase big enough for that kind of leap." "Then I'll come to you." She shook her head. "My life isn't yachts and helicopter picnics. It's early mornings and kids with glue on their faces and a kitchen that still has wallpaper from the 90s. I don't care about any of that. You say that now, but I've walked through gilded halls and glass towers, Whitney. None of it ever made me feel anything close to what I feel when I'm next to you." She exhaled, overwhelmed. "You barely know me. I know enough to want more." They stood there for a long time, the sea stretching endlessly below them. A breeze swept through, cooling the heat pulsing between them. "I can't promise I'll be easy," she said finally. "I get cautious when I care." "I'm not asking for easy," he said. "Just honest." A few hours later, they wandered through the village's cobbled streets, sharing slices of baklava from a paper plate and ducking into artisan shops. Whitney tried on a pair of handmade earrings, and when she turned to show him, he was already at the counter handing the shop owner a black card. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to," he replied, slipping one of the earrings gently into her hand. "You looked at them like they were a dream just out of reach." She tilted her head. "You do that a lot." "What?" "Make unreachable things feel close." As the sun began to dip, casting the sky in layers of rose and gold, they returned to the villa for a quiet dinner on the terrace. A chef had arrived while they were out, and now bowls of grilled octopus, roasted vegetables, and lemon-infused risotto filled the table. Whitney leaned back in her chair, watching the horizon. "I used to think I'd have a life like this. Not the wealth necessarily, but the peace. The stillness. Then things got messy." He reached for his wine. "What happened?" "I got engaged 2 years ago," she said quietly. "He left 2 months before the wedding. Said he couldn't handle my grief after my mom died. Said I was too heavy." Trent's jaw tightened. "He was a coward. I believed him for a long time." "You shouldn't have." She met his gaze. "You say that like it's easy to forget. It's not. But it gets easier when someone reminds you of your worth." They sat in silence, the stars beginning to prick through the sky above them. A soft breeze rustled the olive trees below. "Why me?" she asked finally. He didn't hesitate. "Because you see the world in color. Even after everything you've been through, you still look at life like it's worth painting." Her eyes burned. "You barely saw my art." "I didn't mean your drawings." That night, as they returned to the ship, Whitney stood at the railing outside her cabin, staring at the sea. The distant lights of Santorini faded into the horizon, but the weight of the evening clung to her like salt in the air. She hadn't planned on any of this. Not the connection. Not the clarity. And certainly not the way her chest ached now that reality was starting to creep back in. The cruise would end in 2 days, and the idea of returning to her quiet, predictable life without him in it suddenly felt unbearable. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Couldn't sleep?" Trent asked. "No," she said softly. He stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers. "You're not going to lose me, Whitney." She turned her head. "Then don't let this be something beautiful we leave behind at port." "I won't," he said. But even as he said it, she knew promises were easy on moonlit decks. What mattered was what came next. The early morning haze wrapped around the ship as it pulled into its final port. Whitney stood on the upper deck, arms folded against the breeze. The harbor ahead buzzed with life vendors setting up stalls, taxis weaving through narrow streets, passengers craning for one last view. She hadn't slept. Below her, the crew prepared for disembarkation. Luggage carts rolled past in steady lines, passengers gathered near the gangway with bright-eyed chatter. This was supposed to be the end of something a week away, a reset. But instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to leap or hold her breath and turn back. "You're up early." Trent's voice came from behind her, a little rougher than usual, like he hadn't slept either. "I didn't want to miss the sunrise," she said without turning. "Not after everything." He came to stand beside her, his jacket open, shirt sleeves pushed to his elbows. "Funny. I was hoping I'd find you here." Whitney glanced sideways. "You didn't have to." "I did." He paused. "Because I have a question to ask you." She turned fully now, heart thudding once again in a way that had become far too familiar since meeting him. "This isn't a vacation for me anymore," he said. "It stopped being that the moment I saw you sitting across from me in that dining room. I know it's only been a handful of days, but I also know what I feel. And I'm not walking off this ship pretending it didn't change everything." Whitney's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying come with me. Not forever. Just for a little while. Let me show you what my life actually looks like. Not the headlines. Not the money. Just me. Let's see what this becomes without the ocean holding it together." She stared at him, torn between fear and the weightlessness of hope. "I have a job," she said slowly. "A school full of kids expecting me back Monday." "I know," he said. "And I'd never ask you to give that up. I just want a little time. 1 weekend. I have a place in London. Private flight leaves in 2 hours." Whitney blinked. "London. It's quieter than New York," he said, offering the faintest smile. "And I've been needing quiet lately." She hesitated, her mind racing. "What happens if we do this and it doesn't work? Then we'll know we tried. But if we don't, we'll always wonder." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant call of seagulls and the hum of the ship's engines winding down. She took a slow breath. Okay. Trent froze. Okay. She nodded once. I'll come with you. The relief in his face was almost boyish. You won't regret it. I might panic mid-flight, she warned. Then I'll order you champagne and distract you with terrible jokes until we land. 2 hours later, Whitney stepped into a world she never imagined she'd see. The jet's interior was all soft leather, polished wood, and hushed elegance. But it wasn't the extravagance that overwhelmed her, it was how normal Trent made it feel. Like she belonged there beside him, like she wasn't just a passenger visiting someone else's world. They landed in London with the sky a pale silver, the streets damp from a recent rain. A sleek car waited on the tarmac, and within minutes, they were gliding through quiet avenues lined with brick townhouses and iron railings. His place was tucked behind ivy-covered gates in a quiet garden square. Inside, it was warm and inviting, bookshelves packed with novels and sketchbooks, a record player in one corner, a faded leather armchair that looked well lived in. This doesn't look like what I expected, Whitney said, stepping inside. Good, Trent replied. I didn't want it to. Over the next 2 days, she saw a side of him no magazine could capture. He cooked breakfast barefoot, burned the toast, and cursed softly when the smoke alarm chirped. He took her to a tiny cafe tucked between bookstores and introduced her to the barista by name. At night, they walked through the misty streets, hands clasped, laughter echoing off the damp cobblestones. And he didn't try to impress her, not once. On the third morning, she sat cross-legged on his kitchen counter while he poured coffee, his hair a mess, his shirt wrinkled. I should go back soon, she said quietly. My students have an art show coming up. They'll skin me alive if I miss it. He handed her a mug and leaned against the counter. I thought you might say that. She looked up, brow raised. I already booked your flight. You leave tonight. First class. I'll come with you. Her heart skipped. Seriously. I want to see your world. You saw mine. It's only fair. She narrowed her eyes. You're not going to be bored in a town with one movie theater and a diner that closes at 8? I'll survive, he said. Besides, I want to see what your life looks like. Where you keep your paintbrushes. What your favorite aisle at the grocery store is. I want all of it. Her throat tightened. What are you doing to me, Trent Everett? Falling, he said simply. 3 weeks later, he stood in the back of her art classroom, watching her students hang their final projects. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, and he didn't flinch when a 7-year-old spilled glue on his shoes. When the show ended, and the last parent had left, he pulled her into the storage room, shut the door, and dropped to one knee. Whitney's hands flew to her mouth. I don't have a ring yet, he said. I didn't want to wait for perfect. I just know I don't want another day to go by without you knowing I want forever. Her eyes filled. Are you asking me to marry you in a room that smells like finger paint and glitter glue? He grinned. Exactly. She laughed through her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He rose, kissed her, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, knowing with absolute certainty that this wasn't a fantasy or a vacation or a dream she'd wake from. This was her life now, and it was just beginning. Whitney had never seen her small town look so alive. The community center buzzed with laughter and music, transformed for the night into something magical. Twinkling fairy lights draped from the wooden beams, casting a golden glow over the tables dressed in fresh linen and wildflowers. Neighbors who'd known her since she was in pigtails now mingled in formal wear, sipping champagne and whispering about the man beside her. Trent stood tall in a navy-tailored suit, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as if he'd always belonged there. And maybe she realized he did. Are you sure you're okay with this? She asked under her breath as another wave of curious eyes swept over them. I've been to galas with prime ministers, he replied without shifting his gaze from hers. But nothing's made me feel more welcome than Mrs. Porter handing me a casserole and asking if I had good intentions. Whitney laughed, the kind that came from deep in her chest. She only gave you the casserole because she wants to recruit you for the town fundraiser. I already told her I'd double the donation goal if she promises to keep making that mac and cheese. She tilted her head. You're impossible. And you love me anyway. Before she could respond, a microphone crackled at the front of the room. Principal Hargrove, in a bow tie that had seen better decades, tapped it twice before clearing his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for tonight's Community Arts Gala. Tonight we not only celebrate the creativity of our students and the generosity of our patrons, but also a very special announcement. Whitney's eyes widened. She turned to Trent. You didn't. I did, he said softly, eyes gleaming. Thanks to a generous endowment, Hargrove continued, our school will be launching a dedicated arts wing next year, complete with new studios, supplies, and scholarships. It will be named in honor of one of our most beloved teachers and her late mother, who inspired her creativity from the beginning, the Langston Center for the Arts. For a moment, her ears rang. Her breath caught in her throat as the room erupted in applause. She turned to Trent, stunned. I don't even know what to say. Don't say anything, he said, voice low. Just know I did it because I believe in what you do. And because your mother would be proud. Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked fast, willing the tears away. You didn't have to do this. I didn't, he agreed. But I wanted to. Because this town is where you became you. And now it's part of me too. He leaned in and kissed her gently, the kind of kiss that quieted the room even as the applause continued. She melted into it, hands on his chest, heart full to bursting. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the music softened into background hum, Whitney led him into the school's darkened art room. The smell of linseed oil and dried paint still clung to the air. She flicked on the small lamp by her desk, casting a circle of light over a canvas she hadn't touched in days. I didn't think I'd ever want to paint again, she said, unrolling a fresh sheet of paper. But something's changed. He sat on the stool opposite her, watching her with an expression that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. Then paint. She dipped a brush into water, then touched it to the paper. Her strokes were shaky at first, but steadying with each pass. I used to think love was something that happened after everything else fell into place, she said, not looking up. Like it had to wait behind the grief, the fear, the mess. Trent reached across the table and curled his fingers around hers. But sometimes love shows up first, and makes everything else fall into place. The brush dropped from her fingers and she stood, walking around the table. He met her halfway, pulling her into his arms. I'm not going anywhere, he said against her hair. This is it for me. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. I believe you. Months passed and life found its rhythm. They split their time between her hometown and his quiet London flat, never apart for more than a few days. He learned how to make pancakes without burning them. She stopped apologizing when she cried during old movies. They hosted art nights in the school gym and brunches in his garden. When her students asked if Mr. Everett was going to stay, she simply smiled and nodded. One rainy afternoon, she stood barefoot in her kitchen, mixing cake batter as music played softly in the background. Trent walked in, holding a small velvet box. She raised an eyebrow. You already proposed. You don't get a do-over just because we're making dessert. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold pendant shaped like a brushstroke. This is just because it's Tuesday, he said. She laughed, slipping the necklace on. You really are the most ridiculous man I've ever met. And you're the only woman who makes ridiculous feel like home. They kissed, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that tasted like forever. Later, after the cake was in the oven and the rain softened into mist, they curled up on the sofa, legs tangled, laughter echoing off the walls. No headlines. No ships. No glamour. Just love. And it was more than enough.